an original.
From Story Studio Network.
I'm Erin Trafford in Halifax.
I'm Dave Trafford in Toronto.
And this is Now and Next.
This week, Now and Next brings you a special Remembrance Week series, brought to you by the RCAF Foundation.
As we approach Remembrance Day, November 11th, here in Canada, we're called upon to acknowledge and honor the years of service our veterans have afforded this country and the sacrifices they made, often with their lives.
But it's also an opportunity to celebrate the rich history of this country that has informed and shaped our culture, our national identity, and our place in the world. I'm Dave Trafford.
I'm Erin Trafford. In this limited podcast series, we endeavor to explore some of the stories that are uniquely rooted in the history of the Royal Canadian Air Force and Canadian aviation.
Welcome to Pathway to the Stars.
The history of aviation is filled with stories about the heroes of the world wars, the captains of the clouds, all courageous men in their fancy flying machines.
Like Billy Bishop, William Barker, we've met those characters so far.
Yeah, the Billies. But as we have dug into their stories and learned more about Canada's role in the First World War, we came across the unlikely connection between Bishop, Barker, and Amelia Earhart, who was inspired to fly when she saw that air show at the Armour Heights Airfield in Toronto. And then, of course, she went on to become the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean.
From Harbour Grace, Newfoundland to Ireland. Again, a remarkable feat for anyone. She was the second person to do it and the first woman to do it. So definitely a very lasting impression if we want to trace that back to her time in Toronto.
And Chantal Gagnon at Historica Canada says Earhart racked up several flying records, including a solo flight also across the Pacific.
One of the lasting things about a story like Amelia Earhart's is how inspirational she was to the women who came after her, and how much her courage and her adventurous spirit changed the way other women approached and were allowed to approach things like aviation.
Yeah, Earhart gets the credit for inspiring women who followed her, but when I was talking to Rick Gillespie, he's the guy that heads up the International Group for Historic Aircraft Recovery out of Pennsylvania, he told me Earhart's celebrity actually causes us to overlook other women who were pilots at the same time.
We're missing dozens and dozens of great female pilots who were much better than Amelia Earhart.
Now, Gillespie's written extensively about Earhart, including a book called Finding Amelia, the true story of Earhart's disappearance. Now, there were dozens of other female pilots, he says, many of whom were better pilots than Earhart. But Earhart's story is somewhat parallel to Billy Bishop's, whom we have learned was something of a self-promoter.
What they didn't have that Amelia Earhart had, they weren't married to probably the finest promoter since P.T. Barnum. She was managed by George Palmer Putnam, a master of media manipulation and promotion.
Earhart had a veritable media machine behind her.
The world ladybird and her crew, ready for an adventure that nobody has ever tried before. Amelia Earhart.
No shortage of photos and motion pictures of her in her plane. She's speaking to large gatherings, being feted by all forms of fancy folk in the day. And all the announcements talked like this for whatever reason when they narrated the newsreels. So they had this crazy self-imposed accent. But except when she sat down to do an interview in London, well, then it was the British accent that took over, talking to her about her transatlantic flight.
Where did you actually make your landing, Miss Earhart?
I cruised inland until I found a suitable pasture. I landed there after frightening all the cows in the neighborhood and rolled up to the farmer's front door.
Who was the first person you saw?
the owner of the land came out. I think he was surprised to find an airplane.
Now, it's hardly spontaneous. It's not conversational. If you hear it, her clipped responses are clearly scripted and rehearsed. When she said she scared all the cows in the field when she set her plane down, and how shocked the farmer was to see an airplane in his yard.
But nevertheless, she was a total rock star.
Sure.
And she used her celebrity to support the fortunes of women, whether they were pilots or not.
The history of our times is written. It must record as supremely significant the physical, psychic, and social changes women have undergone in these exciting decades.
She believed the scientific developments and the innovations of the early 20th century opened up these boundless possibilities and opportunities for women in particular. But at the same time, she did not consider herself a feminist.
In the 30s, Amelia Earhart was doing a luncheon talk at the Canadian Club. And there was a writer there named Gordon Sinclair who was not a huge fan of women's liberation. He went and he tried to challenge her, and he was basically accusing her of trying to claim that women should be the equal to men in aviation. And she said, no, not in aviation, in everything.
She just sort of refused to be bound by her gender, believing men and women were equals.
And this is from a woman who didn't consider herself to be a feminist or somebody who was hugely focused on women's liberation. She always said, I don't need to be because it's coming anyway.
By the way, if you're enjoying this podcast and want to learn more about our aviation history, visit the RCAF Foundation website, rcaffoundation.ca. And while you're there, you may want to donate to the RCAF Foundation scholarships that are offered to Canada's next generation of aviation and aerospace leaders.
So clearly, Amelia Earhart understated her role in the feminist movement. I mean, history's view of her in that role tends to overshadow her attention, I think, to science. I mean, today, she'd be championed as a STEM champion: science, technology, engineering, math. Now, all the students who've received the scholarships you were talking about from the RCAF Foundation, for example, are enrolled in STEM programs, and they have their sights set on a career in aviation or aerospace. And a significant number of them are young women.
Jennifer Blake is the executive director at the RCAF Foundation. She says 30% of the 27,000 Air Cadets in Canada are young women, and nearly half of the more than 500 RCAF Foundation scholarship recipients are women. One in particular embodied the Foundation's mission to inspire the next generation of aviation leaders.
In 2021, one really stood out, and that was Agnes Neon-Desi.
As I grew up, people would ask me, what did you want to be in the future? And I'll become a pilot.
Her application was really incredible. She was born in a refugee camp in Zimbabwe.
I remember one time one person told me that there was only 2 female pilots in the country, in Zimbabwe.
She wrote an essay to us about being inspired watching the planes flying overhead while in the refugee camp and not really understanding as a young girl what they were, how they were flying, how are they in the air, and how do I get to do what those airplanes are doing. After her mother passed away, the whole family moved to Saskatchewan. And so even while she was in high school, she's volunteering at the Saskatchewan Aviation Museum. She's taking flying lessons to learn how to be a private pilot. She dreams of being a commercial pilot one day.
It's hard to fathom. I mean, a young woman born in a refugee camp in Zimbabwe, fascinated by planes flying overhead, then moving to Saskatchewan, of all places, where she pursues her ambition to fly.
Hearing her story, it really matched the purpose of the foundation and what we want to do with these scholarships that we're giving out. It is to inspire and support this future generation of dreamers, of aviation dreamers, people who want to touch the sky no matter how.
And Agnes has her eyes on the stars.
I believe there is going to be more advancing technology up ahead that our generation will be able to come up with.
To have a dream like that and to see it, like she's flying planes now. She had never been in a plane, until she was in on her way to Canada, really. And so to then go from not understanding what a plane was, really, to flying one yourself a decade later, that's a pretty incredible story.
There's no shortage of incredible individual stories to inspire women who want to fly. But there's also a long list of organizations that have come together to support, to encourage, to mentor, to nurture women who want to pursue a career in aviation. Groups like the 99s.
The 99s is a great place to start.
No, they don't play hockey, and they've got nothing to do with Wayne.
I think they were the very first organization that ever worked supporting kind of women in aviation, women pilots in aviation. So they were started back in 1929, and it was actually Amelia Earhart who was their very first president. And I believe it was about 115 or so female pilots at the time came together and started up this organization so that they would all have support from each other.
Then there's the Northern Lights Aero Foundation.
It actually started out of a group of people from the first Canadian chapter of the 99s.
The Northern Lights Aero Foundation actually is based in Ontario with a view to inspiring women in aviation and aerospace.
So in Ontario, they launched a number of years ago, but their kind of role is, again, to inspire women in aviation and aerospace, to support and to provide networking opportunities for other women. And one of the directors of their foundation is Judy Cameron.
My inspiration to become a pilot was my first flight.
Who was the first woman pilot for Air Canada.
I never thought of myself as a pioneer. I just discovered flying and absolutely loved it and wanted to pursue it wholeheartedly. I think, though, it became evident to me quite quickly that how I performed would reflect upon the women that followed after me.
Not only does the Northern Lights Aero Foundation have a great mentorship program to support women entering the aviation field, they also have annual Elsie McGill Awards.
My name is Kathleen Legg. I am a proud 2020 recipient of the Elsie Award in the Rising Star category.
My name is Catherine Adamanchuk, and I am the recipient of the 2020 Elsie Engineering Award.
I'm Stacey Jackson. To be recognized as an Elsie McGill Award recipient is a very significant moment in my life.
If you don't know the name Elsie McGill in Canada, you should.
Elsie McGill's story was part of the Canadian Heritage Moment series produced by Historica Canada.
The real story is the work we've done retooling this factory.
To build the Hawker Hurricane.
Indeed. 40 planes last month with a capacity of up to 100.
Elsie McGill was instrumental in the mass production of the Hawker Hurricane, which was a very popular plane flown overseas in Europe in the Second World War.
Elsie McGill was the world's first female aeronautical engineer. She oversaw Canada's production of Hawker Hurricanes during the Second World War, earning her the nickname Queen of the Hurricane.
She's really the world's first female AME.
The Elsies are among a number of awards acknowledging the extraordinary skills and abilities of women in aviation.
Elevate Aviation is amazing in that they support women through all facets of the aviation industry.
Elevate Aviation focuses on the multidisciplined aspects in the industry.
Their annual Inspire Awards not only celebrate excellence in female pilots, but also women who work in all sorts of other categories of aviation and aerospace.
مرحبا اسمي نور أتيم وأنا بشتغل طيار بإير إنويت. With Air Inuit, I'm based up in Nunavik, sometimes in Shefferville, sometimes in Kuujjuaq. I feel very privileged to be able to fly there and see the north.
My name is Jessalyn Teed, and I am a first officer at Sunwing Airlines.
I'm Jessica Burns. I'm a retired aircraft maintenance engineer from WestJet, and I am a professor at Centennial College for the School of Aviation.
Lima Victor Tower, runway 26, active winds 210 at 5, altimeter 2960. Fly the helicopter route, report the water tower identified.
My name is Melissa Swain, and I am a VFR traffic controller at Waterloo Airport in Ontario.
They just launched this year the Elevate Aviation Learning Center, where they're providing free programs for women who want to get into aviation in some facet and don't know exactly what they want to do.
And then there's the Hangar Queens.
The Hangar Queens were founded by two women, Stephanie and Alicia, and together they make up the Hangar Queens, and they are the first aircraft maintenance engineer networking group in Canada. And so what they're doing is showcasing the work of female AMEs.
AMEs, that's aircraft maintenance engineers. And with that in mind, I thought it was interesting to see how Air Canada marked International Women's Day in 2020.
Good morning, Air Canada 167, we're gate 145. We have clearance 190 Bravo with India.
Air Canada 167, heavy Toronto clearance.
Air Canada operated Flight 167 from Toronto to Edmonton with a fully female crew. Every aspect of the flight was covered off by female Air Canada employees.
Air Canada 167, give way to outbound 67, push tailly, Sunlane 7, call for taxi.
Flight AC 167 from Toronto to Edmonton, March 5th of 2020, also made history by being the first transcontinental flight to be guided by all-female NAV Canada air traffic controllers.
Air Canada 167, contact departure 128, Definitely have a good flight, ladies.
From departure in Toronto to landing in Edmonton.
Air Canada 167, continue climb to flight level 230. Continue climb up to flight level 230 now, Air Canada 167. Thanks so much.
Now, once we started talking about all these amazing women and the stories about them, Jennifer Blake was on a roll.
There's an interesting story about Canada's first female bush pilot, if you want to hear it.
Jennifer introduced us to Vi Milstead, Canada's first female bush pilot. Yeah.
Okay, so her name is Vi Milstead, and they just released a stamp with her face on it in October 2022. Canada Post featured her as one of their 5 Canadian in Flight stamp series. So Vi was born in Toronto and in like 1919, and she always wanted to be a pilot. So her parents took her out of school during the Great Depression, and she's saving her pennies to learn how to fly. So she gets her pilot's license, she gets her commercials pilot's license, she gets her instructor rating, and guess where she's teaching? Barker Field.
Another connection to William Barker. Vi Milstead was a flight instructor at Barker Field.
Talk about Barker not having very many things named after him, but you know, there are a few, and this is one of them, and it's one of those cool connections.
Milstead acquits herself as a wartime pilot in Europe.
During the Second World War, she goes overseas. She's flying something like 47 different kinds of aircraft while in Britain with the Air Transport Auxiliary. She's one of the only women to be part of the ATA. And then she ends up coming home, teaching again at Barker Field for a number of years. Then her and her husband relocate to Sudbury. They start an airline business up there, and she ends up becoming Canada's first female bush pilot out of Sudbury, flying kind of miners and foresters around up in Northern Ontario.
That might be something I need to follow up. My dad was a forester in Chapleau, Ontario around that time. Spent more than his share of time flying around in and out of lumber camps and bushfire sites in de Havilland beavers and otters. What do you suppose the chances are he was one of Vi's passengers? Vi's experience reminds me of a young woman we met as we were working on this show. Her name is Brianna Ricketts. Yeah, she's a brilliant young woman from Happy Valley, Goose Bay in Newfoundland and Labrador. Brianna is a captain with Air Borealis.
She's just 23 years old and has more than 3,700 hours of flight time. That actually might be a Canadian record. She started flying when she was barely a teenager. So I asked Brianna what bit of advice she would give to her 12-year-old self.
You got a bumpy ride ahead, but you got this. Do it with a smile on your face. Like, show everyone, prove yourself. Like, go to work every day happy. Don't be the Debbie Downer of the group. Just go in, work hard, smile, just enjoy the ride. Because by doing that, it really makes people respect you a lot more. And yeah.
Describe to me the feeling you get. I'm sure it still happens. Like the minute that those wheels lift off, like what does that feel like in your body?
I still get butterflies every time I go flying, for sure. Like, it's just flying on the Labrador coast is absolutely beautiful. Having the view every day, just looking at your window, looking at the mountains and the hills, and looking behind you and seeing all these passengers going home to their kids and bringing their essentials to the coast. Like, you feel, and you get off the plane and you lower the door for them to get out, and they're going to hug their kids, and it's just like, oh, like the reason they're back to their home is because of me. Like, it feels great being a part of their lives.
And in terms of, I often ask specifically women that I interview this question when we're talking about their career and being inspirational and things like that. Not necessarily the company you want to work for or the job title you want or anything like that, but what is the next cool thing that you want to do in your career as someone who is flight obsessed? Like, is there a mountain you want to climb? You know what I mean? Like, what is the thing you want to do?
Well, I definitely have some more challenges coming my way. I have another exam I have to write called the Airline Transport Pilot License. And that's something I want to get done really soon. Once I get that done, then I can apply for jobs around the world. Like, by having this certificate, I can travel the world and fly planes anywhere. So it's my one thing that's holding me back right now for traveling and trying different jobs other places right now. That's my biggest challenge right now, is getting that exam done.
Tell me about your necklace.
My dad, he gave that to me when I was 14 after I did that solo flight. Because my dad, he's a pilot as well. He doesn't work with the airlines. He works with Air Canada in Gander. He's air traffic controller. So he has a little float plane that he bought. When I was 16, he bought the plane. And yeah, me and him do a bunch of fly. I just came home from Gander. Actually, I was home on my days off. And me and him were up flying around together. And yeah, he loves flying just as much as me. So I'm basically living his dream, is what he says to me. Oh, you're living my dream. You're living my dream. Yeah. So he gave this to me when I did my solo flight.
I'm glad I asked.
Yeah. Brianna Ricketts and Agnes Neondesi are just part of that continuum of women making their mark in Canadian aviation over the past century. From Amelia Earhart being inspired to fly when she visited an airfield in Toronto, to pioneers like Elsie McGill, Vi Milstead, Captain Judy Cameron, to the next generation of aviation leaders. The sky is not the limit.
This Now and Next series, Pathway to the Stars, is produced for the RCAF Foundation by Story Studio Network. And we'd encourage you to go over to their website, check them out, rcaffoundation.ca, and while you're there, you may want to consider donating to the RCAF Foundation scholarships offered to Canada's next generation of aviation and aerospace leaders like Grace Wilson.
I love flying. Both the experiences of flying and adventure in large and small aircraft, and now getting older, appreciating the many people and their range of skills in the aviation sector, like design, refining, and maintaining, are very noteworthy for me. A year ago, I had the difficult choice of saying thank you but no to Queen's University Engineering. But yesterday, I was out training climbs and descents at 7,000 feet around Peterborough, Ontario, and I know I made the right decision. The combination of applied technical challenges and the spirit of adventure required to be an aviator were amazing things to feel up in the air. I set my bar high, with my family leading by modeling the value of striving for success, for myself and on behalf of others. Pilots take people places, but also cargo of medicines and soldiers to help keep our world safer for everyone, Canadians.
Your money helps with those ambitions and those dreams. Again, go to rcffoundation.ca and make a donation today. Now and Next is produced by Becky Coles. Our production manager is Jamie Nickerson. Our audio editors are Mike Trutler and Drew Garner. Our sonic logo designer is Greg McDonald. And our executive producers are me, Dave Trafford, and Aaron Trafford. Thanks for listening.
This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.